You know us, we tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. We are Legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us. We are anonymous.
People have to understand, are you using your device or is your device using you? Can you put it down? Can you turn it off?
My biggest concern is the unfettered access to social media and cell phones, quite frankly, because there's a biology to these things that are as addictive as alcohol, nicotine, and gambling.
Right now, a family is out to dinner at a restaurant, not enjoying each other's company, but each staring into the screen of their choice, completely ignoring the family members. And this is mom, dad, and the children all doing the same thing while they continue to eat. They did it the entire meal. Right now, an infant is getting their first iPhone and learning to tap and swipe all while drooling on it. 92% of 2-year-olds play video games because that is what parents are putting in front of their precious children to keep them entertained and quiet.
This is your life now. No natural behavior. Everybody's wearing clothes they don't want to wear. Everybody's showing up and doing something they don't want to do, they have no connection to. That's the problem with our society. And then what's the reward for all this stuff? Go home, get a big TV. Go home, you're gonna get a shiny belt buckle. You're gonna get a nice purse. You're gonna wear shoes that you couldn't afford last week. You're gonna get that dream car. And every week we're chasing down this new object. And every week we're trying to fill this hole in this sad shadow of a life that we've been left with after work. That you work 8 to whatever the hours a day plus commuting, and then you're like this. And that's your life. That's your real life. All that other stuff is not your life anymore. All that other stuff is work. And most of us have committed to that. I know you've been there before, and I've been there before. And we understand that it's a trap because we got out of it. But for the people that are in it, a lot of times they don't even understand it's a trap. They just think it's a good job. They think they got dental. I'm doing really good. I got my own parking spots, got my name on it. And you're just a piece of a heartless, shitty machine that makes money.
All these kids that are graduating college with these $80,000 degrees that can't even work at Starbucks. All the people who put their money in the stock market and bought all this real estate, 2008, it all went away. Don't let anybody fool you into believing that there's a guarantee, that there's a safe way. The well-trodden path is the scariest way, in my opinion, right? Because then you just spent the last 80 years of your life doing everything that everybody else told you to do, and you never really lived or produced anything unique. If everybody's going this way, go that way.
We now know that many of the major social media companies hire individuals called attention engineers who borrow principles from Las Vegas casino gambling, among other places, to try to make these products as addictive as possible.
In South Korea, internet addiction is classified along with alcohol, cigarettes, and gambling as an addiction.
You know, it's about balance. It's not that they're inherently bad, and it's not that texting or social media is inherently bad, but it's when it gets out of balance. If somebody carries their phone wherever they go, like they physically feel anxiety if they put it down. When they're with their friends and have to have it up the entire time looking at the phone while they're with their friends. You know, when they wake up in the morning and check their phone before they say good morning to the person sleeping next to them. These are problems. This is out of balance.
I'm not knocking the phone. What I'm saying is we have to understand, we have to at least ask ourselves, around the world, you here in England, wherever you are, what is it doing to us?
This is therefore to say that transformation of human consciousness through meditation is frustrated so long as we think of it in terms of something that I myself can bring about by some kind of wangle, by some sort of gimmick. Because you see, that leads to endless games of spiritual one-upmanship and of guru competitions, of my guru is more effective than your guru, my yoga's faster than your yoga, I'm more aware of myself than you are, I'm humbler than you are, I'm sorrier for my sins than you are, I love you more than you love me. This interminable goings-on about which people fight and wonder whether they're a little bit more evolved than somebody else and so on. All that can just fall away. And then we get this strange feeling that we have never had, you see, in our lives, except occasionally by accident. Some people get a glimpse that we are no longer this poor little stranger and afraid in a world it never made, but that you are this universe, and you are creating it at every moment, because you see, it starts now. It didn't begin in the past. There was no past. See, if the universe began in the past, when that happened, it was now. See? Well, it's still now. And the universe is still beginning now, and it's trailing off like the wake of a ship from now. And that wake of the ship fades out, so does the past. You can look back there to explain things, but the explanation disappears. You'll never find it there. Things are not explained by the past. They're explained by what happens now. That creates the past, and it begins here. That's the birth of responsibility. Because otherwise, you can always look over your shoulder and say, well, I'm the way I am because my mother dropped me. And she dropped me because she was neurotic because her mother dropped her. Now away we go back to Adam and Eve, or to a disappearing monkey or something. We never get at it. But in this way, you're faced with it, you're doing all this. And that's an extraordinary shock. So, cheer up. You can't blame anyone else for the kind of world you're in. And if you know, you see that I, in the sense of the person, the front, the ego, it really doesn't exist, then it won't go to your head too badly if you wake up and discover that you're God.
Reggie Jackson struck out 2,600 times in his career, the most in the history of baseball. But you don't hear about the strikeouts. People remember the home runs. Fall forward. Thomas Edison conducted 1,000 failed experiments. Did you know that? I didn't know that. Because the 1,001st was the light bulb. Fall forward. Every failed experiment is one step closer to success. You've got to take risks, and I'm sure you've probably heard that before, but I want to talk to you about why that's so important. I got 3 reasons, and then you can pick up your iPhones. First, you will fail at some point in your life. Accept it. You will lose. You will embarrass yourself. You will suck at something. There's no doubt about it. And I know that's probably not a traditional message for a graduation ceremony, but hey, I'm telling you, embrace it, because it's inevitable. And I should know. In the acting business, you fail all the time. Early on in my career, I auditioned for a part in a Broadway musical. Perfect role for me, I thought, except for the fact that I can't sing. So I'm in the wings, I'm about to go on stage, but the guy in front of me, he's singing like like Pavarotti. He's just, and he's just going on and on and on. And I'm just shrinking. I'm getting smaller and smaller. So they say, oh, thank you very much, and you'll be hearing from us. So I come out with my little sheet music, and it was Just My Imagination by the Temptations. That's what I came up with. So I hand it to the accompanist, and she looks at it and looks at me and looks out at the director and was like, all right. So I start, I'm going to sing. I'm like, it's just my imagination once again, and they're coming away with me. And I'm not saying anything, so I'm thinking I'm getting better. So I start getting into it. It was just my imagination. Running. This, thank you very much, Mr. Washington. Thank you. So I assumed I didn't get the job. But the next part of the audition, he called me back. The next part of the audition is the acting part of the audition. Now I'm like, hey, okay, maybe I can't sing, but I know I can act. So they pair me with this guy, and again, I didn't know about musical theater. And musical theater is big, so they can reach everyone all the way in the back of the stadium. And I'm more from a realistic, naturalistic kind of acting where you actually talk to the person next to you. So I don't know what my line was. My line was, well, hand me the cup. And his line was, well, I will hand you the cup, my dear. The cup will be there to be handed to you. I said, oh, okay. Well, should I give you the cup back? Oh, yes, you should give it back to me because you know that is my cup and it should be given back to me. I didn't get the job. But here's the thing. I didn't quit. I didn't fall back. I walked out of there to prepare for the next audition, and the next audition, and the next audition. I prayed. I prayed, and I prayed. But I continued to fail, and fail, and fail. But it didn't matter, because you know what? There's an old saying, you hang around the barbershop long enough, sooner or later you're going to get a haircut. So you will catch a break, and I did catch a break. Last year, I did a play called Fences on Broadway. Someone talked about it. Won the Tony Award. And I didn't have to sing, by the way. But here's the kicker. It was at the Court Theater. It was at the same theater that I failed that first audition 30 years prior. The point is, and I'll pick up the pace, the point is every graduate here today has the training and the talent to succeed. But do you have the guts to fail? Here's my second point about failure. If you don't fail, you're not even trying. I'll say it again. If you don't fail, you're not even trying. My wife told me this great expression. To get something you never had, you have to do something you never did. Les Brown's a motivational speaker. He made an analogy about this. He says, imagine you're on your deathbed, and standing around your deathbed are the ghosts representing your unfulfilled potential. The ghost of the ideas you never acted on. The ghost of the talents you didn't use. And they're standing around your bed, angry, disappointed, and upset. They say, we came to you because you could have brought us to life, they say. And now we have to go to the grave together. So I ask you today, how many ghosts are going to be around your bed?
Radio wave. It's got so much power that it can destroy electronics across a huge area. In fact, across the entire world in the case of a superstorm, a solar superstorm. The EMP can be made by nature, by the sun, by a solar superstorm, or it can be made by man by a nuclear weapon. And it can be made by non-nuclear weapons as well.
Well, some lawmakers are calling this one of the most debilitating threats to Texas, the electromagnetic pulse, or EMP.
Doug, our food, our water supplies, electronics, hospital banking, all of it depends on the electronic grid. Now, in the event of a widespread EMP attack, all of that could be wiped out. Imagine one day if your lights, TV, and phone didn't work.
There'd be no water, no gas, no generators would start.
No electricity, all because of an electromagnetic pulse, an EMP, which is a powerful electric charge in the air that physically damages electronics within a given area. They can be given off by weather or a weapon.
Can you describe what the electrical grid looks like in this country and who runs the electrical grid in this country?
Sure. We have 3,000 different utilities that run the electric grid, which is privately owned. It's not run by the government. It's run by private
So these are companies or regional companies that all work with each other?
Yes, that's right. And we have our North American grid is divided into three parts: an eastern grid, a western grid, and a Texas grid. And Canada is part of our grid. Canada is on the same part of our grid. It's part of the eastern and western grid. So it's not just a U.S. grid. It includes Canada. And they're all wired together except for Texas, which has got its own independent.
Why is that, by the way?
Texas grid.
Just came about that way?
It just pretty much came about that way. There are regional entities that manage and try to coordinate these various grids. And Texas decided, decades ago that they wanted to be on their own.
And this you can just put on the wall, the water purification.
Some are already preparing for extreme situations.
That is a major concern.
Dana Ellington says that people come into his Richardson store every day worried about a severe power outage.
Food bars, food tablets, a little miniature stove.
And he's stocking up too. Water, food.
Our biggest sellers are the freeze-dried food.
When it comes to preparing for no electricity, I found out battery-operated items are the #1 seller, followed by solar.
You can be proactive or you can be reactive.
The reason some people want to be proactive now?
But Texas is also one of the primary targets that would be, because our grid is in three parts.
State Senator Bob Hall of Texas is working to shine a light on the issue. This study by the National Center for Policy Analysis illustrates Texas is the only state with a self-contained grid, making it vulnerable. He says his biggest concern if Texas goes dark.
Texas is also the home to the second largest group of military installations in the country,
which use the same kind of commercial power.
Taking out that part of our military would severely cripple our capability.
Hall says this isn't doom and gloom, but the state should take precautions. He'd like to see EMP shielding technologies installed on the grid system.
Electromagnetic pulse.
Yes.
Is that what electricity does as it moves? What does that mean exactly?
Well, think of it this way. I think everybody has had the experience of driving down a highway with your radio on, and then you pass under a high power line and you lose the radio. Then you come back out on the other side. That's basically all an EMP is. It's an electromagnetic field, all right? Except it's much more powerful than the field that you experience on the highway. Now imagine there's so much energy in that field that when you go through it, all the electronics in your car are destroyed. Now imagine that field is not just localized to a small spot on the highway, but it covers all of North America, and it would destroy electronics across that entire area. That's what could be accomplished if you had a single nuclear weapon and detonated it above the atmosphere, say at 300 kilometers or so, up in outer space. Mm-hmm. Mind you, this is a different kind of nuclear attack than the one people are used to thinking about. It wouldn't destroy a city. There'd be no fallout. There'd be no blast effects. If you were standing on the ground directly beneath the explosion and it was detonating overhead at 300 kilometers, or it could be as low as 30 kilometers, it's in the vacuum of space, so that you wouldn't even hear the explosion. There'd be no blast effects that would reach the ground. There'd be no radioactive fallout.
Cars, no ATM, no cell phones or computers, and nuclear reactors would actually melt down, causing a catastrophe. This is what will happen if, during what is known as an EMP attack, that is short for electromagnetic pulse. We had this warning that came out from a U.S. Air Force study. Explain what a terror group or a country can send up into the air and the impact it would have on our lives after such an attack called EMP.
Sure. 30 kilometers or higher, detonated, it produces a pulse that can really catastrophically harm small electronics and even large power transformers.
You don't really see it as you would see like big attacks as you would in, you know, a traditional type war. So all of a sudden you're driving and everything just stops working.
This is the type of attack that we really consider a kill shot for our adversaries. You know, because of the effect it has on our technology. This is the first time in human history where it doesn't take an entire civilization to overtake another because of our dependency on technology and particularly electricity. Any country or non-state actor for that matter that has a nuclear weapon and a delivery system to get it to 30 kilometers or higher, which could even be a weather balloon.
Unfortunately, like so many things, we don't make fundamental elements of the electric grid in this country anymore. The transformers aren't manufactured in the United States anymore. We have to import them from South Korea or Germany. And if these transformers were destroyed, it would basically end us as a civilization. They cannot be mass-produced. Each one has to be made individually by hand. The global production...
You said there's thousands of them.
2,000 of them, yes. 2,000 of them.
Do we have an inventory of them, backup sources for them within our own country?
We have a small number of replacement transformers, less than 1% in reserve. And in part, that's because it's so difficult to replace them. They weigh so much and they're so big. There's only 3 railway cars in the whole country that can move an EHV transformer. Bridges have to be reinforced, roads have to be widened, and that's assuming that the society is intact and you haven't lost other parts of the infrastructure, as would be the case in the aftermath of a catastrophic EMP. That's why it's not just the way to think of these dangerous blackouts that we're talking about. They're not temporary blackouts. When you lose EHV transformers and the control systems, another piece of technology that is fundamental to our civilization is called the SCADA, for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition System. It's a control system that also runs everything. Both of these things are vulnerable to EMP, and if you lose them, that's it for us.
There are allegations that the Putin government signed off on efforts by hackers to penetrate critical infrastructure here in the United States, and this goes to nuclear, water, as well as electrical power grids.
From public reports that there are already efforts to plant malware or to seed malware in SCADA systems, et cetera. Is this something that you're familiar with and are concerned about?
I am aware that there has been reporting with regards to elements within our ICS and SCADA systems. That's something that should concern all of us.
And tonight, concerned that Russian government hackers have carried out probing cyber attacks on vital U.S. infrastructure, including the power grid, potentially giving the Kremlin the ability to turn off the lights. Earlier this year, the Department of Homeland Security and FBI detailed a 2-year multi-stage effort by Moscow targeting hundreds of companies that they believe is still ongoing. The hackers first gained access to small energy-related companies, planting malware that then allowed them to move into larger networks. Once inside the energy suppliers, the Russians collected information on the facility's control systems, attempting to acquire the ability to turn those systems off.
They're identifying targets. They're positioning malware so they could pull the trigger when they wanted to.
From time to time in our country, we read of a state or a city that's without electricity for a few days.
Yes.
Things like that happen, and then they're able to put it back together in a relatively short period of time, but you can see even right there, 3, 4, 5 days, there's really a panic in place and so forth. And what you're saying is, imagine this nationwide.
Right. In fact, there's only a 30-day food supply in the country to feed 320 million people. And water would stop immediately. You know, when you turn on the tap, it requires millions of volts in order to deliver that water through your tap. And the commission couldn't figure out how would we keep 320 million people alive with no food and no water, possibly for years. We estimate that if we had a blackout in this country that lasted 1 year, and that's entirely possible in these scenarios that we're talking about, we could lose up to 90% of our population to starvation, disease, and societal collapse. In the case of a nuclear EMP attack, your car, could be fried, airplanes would fall out of the sky. Nuclear reactors would go Fukushima. We've got 100 nuclear reactors in this country.
5 George, 496 Broadway between Broome and Spring.
to get at America. And an easy way, quite frankly, is through an EMP attack, an electromagnetic pulse attack.
Consider every major city in America, how does it get its water supply? Consider that every major city in America, its average food supply on hand is 21 to 28 days. Consider, where do we get our medication? Consider what happens in nursing homes and hospitals. What happens to our transportation grid? Anything driven that, well, most of them have computers in them, they're all gone.
What do you do in the case of an EMP? Electromagnetic pulse.
A burst of radiation that knocks out every electrical system in the country.
Impending doom.
What you reading, Dad?
Honey, everything's fine. It's nothing to worry about. When things go south, the sheeple will clean out every supermarket in town. Typical sheeple.
90%, let me repeat that, 90% of all Americans will die within 12 to 18 months after an EMP event. This study was done in 2008. Has anything been done since? No.
Our highly connected, just-in-time, efficient technological civilization to cause chaos that could cause tens of millions of Americans to die before it's sorted out.
Tens of millions?
Tens of millions, because if you have no electric power for 6 months to a year, you have no food delivery, you have no gasoline, you have no water. You think about that, it's pretty bad.
Well, that's a horrifying possibility. How are we protecting against that happening?
We're not.
Russia has not adhered to the agreement. They should have been done years ago. It's a threat to whoever you want, and it includes China, and it includes Russia, and it includes anybody else that wants to play that game.
The Trump administration announced it's producing a new small nuke to counter Russia's own tactical nuclear weapons. Critics fear the plan could mark the return to the darkest days.
Is the Pentagon's newest toy, the W76-2, and it is essentially a mini nuke. Less bang, less radiation, less fallout, and most importantly, less responsibility.
I think it's time for a new meeting and for the major countries that have nuclear weapons to meet and develop a new treaty or a new agreement that restricts what can be developed and what cannot be developed, and having countries adhere to that treaty so that there's not one dominant country in the world that can take advantage of other countries.
Naturally, this new nuclear arms race is not America's fault, but everyone else's, namely the usual suspects.
Since 2010, we have seen the return of great power competition. To varying degrees, Russia and China have made clear that they seek to substantially revise the post-Cold War international order and norms of behavior.
Russia has not adhered to the agreement. They should have been done years ago. It's a threat to whoever you want, and it includes China, and it includes Russia, and it includes anybody else that wants to play that game.
We could, of course, beat a dead horse and, again, point out that Russia is not even in the same league as the US when it comes to military budgets. In fact, Russian military spending has been falling for years, while America's has ballooned. Symbolic as well. Within days, the US should begin withdrawing from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, blaming Russia's development of a cruise missile. But really gets on the old nerves here is the Commander-in-Chief of the United States, his unpredictability and seemingly his habit of threatening everyone.
We have more money than anybody else by far. We'll build it up. So we have a tremendous amount of money to play with on our militaries, and we are going to develop the weapons. Funding to modernize our nuclear arsenal is so important. We're spending a tremendous amount of money on our nuclear arsenal.
2 minutes to midnight on the doomsday clock, on the brink, or now officially into a new Cold War, a nuclear arms race. World powers at each other's throats and no light at the end of the tunnel.
Countries will continue to make threats against other countries, just like what's happening now on the different trade negotiations around the world. A major trade negotiation now between China and the United States. And the exercise, sometimes these threats, we'll do this, we'll put tariffs on and so on. Well, the same thing happens militarily and from a national security standpoint. Countries like to sort of pound their chest a little bit and make threats against another country if they don't agree with what they're doing.
With the Saudi Crown Prince heralds a possible nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who's first in line to the Saudi throne, recently sat down for the first U.S. television interview with a Saudi leader in over a decade. In clips released by CBS News, the 32-year-old Crown Prince said, quote, Saudi Arabia does not want to acquire any nuclear bomb, but without a doubt, if Iran developed a nuclear bomb, we will follow suit as soon as possible. The full interview will air March 18th on 60 Minutes. Saudi Arabia has criticized the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which calls for Iran to limit its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. Likewise, U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened to withdraw from the agreement if it's not amended. Prince Mohammed and Trump are scheduled to meet next week at the White House.
And here on set by that international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. The fascinating things about this, Doug, biggest exercises since the Cold War and China's involvement as well.
Yeah, and those two headlines really go side by side. Let's start with what's going on here. Why the biggest? Why do you have to go back to Ronald Reagan in 1981 when the Cold War was top of his priority list? Why do you have to go back to that to find anything even remotely similar? Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that relations have been slightly sour lately between Vladimir Putin's Russia and Europe and the U.S. And it's they really took that sort of tailspin, I'd say, after the annexation of Crimea, Russia's aggression in eastern Ukraine. All of these have added up to a sense that a lot of wariness, a lot of distrust about the other's motives. Vladimir Putin has looked very warily at what he perceives as NATO's aggressive buildup on its Eastern European flank, what you noticed, talked about. And it's true that NATO has deployed more troops, more equipment to Poland, to the Baltic states, in a bid to perhaps have a shield against what it sees as more Russian aggression.
Russia has not adhered to the agreement. This should have been done years ago. It's a threat to whoever you want, and it includes China, and it includes Russia, and it includes anybody else that wants to play that game.
Vladimir Putin, basically, with these exercises, he is responding. He's basically responding with defiance. He is showing, we see your threat, what he perceives as a threat, and we up your ante a little bit. We are ready to see down any potential threat to us. Now, let's be clear. Moscow denies, despite what you said, 300,000 Russian troops. That's a third of Russia's available army, okay? All of those tens of thousands of armored tanks. Russia denies these exercises are to prepare for any large-scale conflict. They do say is they are a reflection and coming amid a time of they're part of the international climate, the tension right now, at a time when they say they are frequently the targets of aggressiveness, where the West is being unfriendly towards Russia as Russia sees it. So it is a show of force, and as one of the Russia General Army Chief of Staff says, it's going to include massive airstrikes, cruise missile training, defensive and offensive operations, raids, bypass operations. It's going to include all of the things you associate normally with if you were to have to fend off a large-scale military conflict or operation.
China involved here then, Doug, invited for the first time. What's Putin's strategy?
This is a remarkable headline. It's almost like you can't put it in enough boldface. Look, right? No, when I say that, not to just be sensational. It's true for a century, for decades. Russia and China were traditional adversaries. They share a 4,200 kilometer, a 3,000 something mile border. They clashed repeatedly. Russia's always been wary of China as a competitor, wanting it to encroach on its vast Siberian territory. And here they are, cooperating militarily. Well, look, it's part of a pattern in recent years, and it goes hand in hand with what I was just saying. The tenser international climate with the West,
with the U.S. has sort of brought Russia and China closer into each other's orbits in not just military cooperation, right, which they are doing today, but also in the areas of trade, of investment, of energy cooperation in oil and gas projects, all of that. So it's part and parcel of a broader sort of rapprochement between these two powers, superpowers, which have been very wary of each other, but now perhaps both are even more wary of the United States. That said, even though Russia's cooperated with China, even though China has thousands of troops as well participating in 900 armored tanks and other equipment, I suspect there's still an element of wariness in there still, that Russia still looks at China as a potential competitor, probably doesn't want to give everything away. Some of its troops are going to be training and doing their exercises far from the Chinese troops.
Comes just as well, doesn't it, as the US has been launching exercises in Syria. I mean, that was reportedly in response to a Russian threat there as well.
What's going on there? Last week, you had the deployment, you had Russian military exercises in southern Syria, and what it was in response to reported Russian threats, Russians saying that they were going to be entering territory in southern Syria near a base where the U.S.-led coalition is based and has operations. And it was in response to that threat that the U.S. started to conduct its own large-scale military exercises around the base at Antomf, and basically trying to say, publicly saying they want the Russians to see for themselves, look up into the sky and see just how ready the U.S. would be to see down any potential threat. And it also comes, let's not forget, after the Russians had deployed their own flotilla of warships right off Syria's coast in the Mediterranean, and at a time, as we're all waiting, perhaps any day now, imminently, for a potential Syrian offensive on Idlib, the last rebel-held enclave in Syria, with the Russian and Iranian allies. So a very tense climate there. What's going on in Syria, part and parcel of this broader equation that helps to explain these giant, unprecedented military exercises, which are taking part in the east of Russia across the expanses of Siberia as well.
The view there of Doug Herbert, our international affairs commentator here on France 24. Thanks, Doug.
The Russian president has criticized the U.S. threats to pull out of a Cold War-era treaty that bans short and medium-range ballistic missiles. Vladimir Putin said that it is hard to predict the consequences of a U.S. withdrawal from the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty signed in 1987. He also warned that the threat of nuclear war should not be underestimated. Putin further hoped that common sense will prevail. The Russian leader made the remarks at his annual end-of-the-year news conference. Regarding the recent standoff with Ukraine, he accused President Poroshenko of seeking to increase his rating by staging provocations in the Black Sea. Putin said the fate of the captured Ukrainian sailors will be decided once the trial is over. John Stepling is an author and commentator who joins us to share with us his thoughts on this. Well, if the U.S. was trying to, in any shape of the word, maintain or eliminate nuclear weapons, well, it's definitely not done so, and then we can see what the Russian president has responded, John Stepling, in his annual address, and I'm quoting, lowering the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons could lead to a global catastrophe. This might lead to the collapse of civilization and the planet, and he said it is right not to underestimate the threat of nuclear war. That's what the Russian president has said. Is this what the U.S. wanted in reaction?
You know, who knows what the United States wanted, but it was a very cogent statement. And it's kind of wonderful that he said it and said it with that kind of clarity. The U.S. has been itching to use some form of nuclear weapon. They allegedly did, in fact, in Afghanistan several years ago, what they think of as tactical nukes. Micro-yield nukes and so forth, but you know the danger is there regardless, which should be very obvious. The U.S. has been the agent of provocation here. They have surrounded with NATO Russia's borders. They have issued sanctions based on nothing. There is all the propaganda about Russiagate and so forth. If any country is guilty of interfering in elections, it's the United States. They have even interfered in Russian elections in the past. But that's not how propaganda works, and we know all of that. I think that Russia and Putin have been extraordinarily restrained in their reactions, given the 2014 coup, fascist coup, that John Brennan and Nuland and Hillary Clinton orchestrated in Ukraine. You know, the provocations go on, and Russia has been very circumspect and very measured in what they have tried to do. At the same time, they've been very effective in fighting off the terrorists in Syria and helping Assad. You know, they work with China on the Silk Road project. All of these things are hedges, in a sense, against U.S. imperialism, which is the great world danger. I think everybody can agree. And the U.S. is kind of recolonizing Africa and has bases in nearly every African country. It's occupied Afghanistan for 17 years, Iraq, and so on. Russia has done none of those things. And here you have the Russian president making a very clear statement about the danger, the catastrophic you know, what the catastrophe that would follow from a nuclear war. I mean, it would be the end of humankind. And yet this is, if you read Western media, U.S. media, is something that never gets mentioned, really, not in those terms. It's a very militaristic society. All you have to do is watch Hollywood movies or listen to the White House to see the truth of that. So it was a very important statement in a certain sense. Of course, you know, it won't be covered in Western media the way we're talking about it right now. The same way like the Yellow Vests protests in France are not being covered in Western media. The U.S. is very selective about what it wants the public to see and hear these days. But nonetheless, you know, the word will get out. Nonetheless, many of the NATO countries heard it. All of the leaders heard it. You know, people in South Asia, China, Iran, everybody heard what Putin said, and it was important that he said it that way. And the U.S. is the one that tore up the treaty, and it's a very dangerous situation.
Thank you, John Stepling-Hoffman, commentator there.
According to NBC News, a senior North Korean defector has said that the country's desperate dictator is prepared to use nuclear weapons to strike the United States and its allies. Tae Yong-ho is the most high-profile North Korean defector in 2 decades, meaning he is able to give a rare insight into the secretive authoritarian regime. According to Tae, North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un is desperate in maintaining his rule by relying on his development of nuclear weapons and the ICBM. ICBM is an acronym for Intercontinental Ballistic Missiles, a long-range rocket that in theory would be capable of hitting the U.S.
The US is set to send more of its nuclear arsenal to Europe, according to a German news channel. 20 nuclear bombs with a total explosive force 80 times greater than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima will be based in Germany. Well, the move might, however, be against a decision made in the German Bundestag. Well, let's get live now from Peter Oliver. Peter, hi, good to see you.
Hello.
So, whose decision is this to make?
Well, ultimately, it's the decision of the German government and German Chancellor Angela Merkel whether or not to allow the US to hold these weapons on German territory. Now, the reason it's come as a bit of a shock, this news that the nuclear arsenal will be upgraded, is because back in 2010, the German Bundestag, well, they all voted to put pressure on the German government to make sure that they told the Americans to get their weapons off German territory.
The German parliament calls on its federal government to demand the US to withdraw American nuclear weapons from the territory of Germany.
Well, back in 2009, the mantra really regarding US nuclear weapons on German territory was that they were not in the will of most Germans. In fact, Angela Merkel herself backed the plans to try and reduce or in fact remove entirely all of this nuclear arsenal from German territory. However, 6 years on from that, 5 years on from Parliament voting to try and push the government to do this, we're now seeing that US nuclear capabilities on German soil aren't going to be removed. They're going to be made bigger, better and more accurate. All this news coming out right now regarding those weapons on the bases in the Rhineland.
And Peter, has there been any international reaction so far?
Well, understandably, the Russian Foreign Ministry has put out a statement. They've said that these actions go against Articles 1 and 2 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, this is a treaty signed between Russia and the United States, designed not to spread nuclear arms around the world. But we've also heard from people here in Germany, particularly senior former parliamentarians who were involved in Angela Merkel's own party during previous parliaments, saying that the only reason they would allow these weapons to be put in place and for them to be upgraded would be to try and provoke Russia.
These new attack options against Russia are consciously provoking our Russian neighbor.
Well, many back in 2010 would have expected that in 2015 would be talking about US nuclear weapons leaving bases in Germany. It seems that over the next few months, we'll be seeing the nuclear capabilities of Washington in its German allies' territory increased and improved.
According to Reuters, Iran says it has many options to neutralize the reimposition of U.S. sanctions on its oil exports, adding that Tehran's regional influence could not be curbed as demanded by Washington. Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, Ali Shamkhani, said that Iran has plans in place that will neutralize the illegal U.S. sanctions against Iran's oil exports. We have many ways to sell our oil. Iranian officials have threatened to disrupt oil shipments from the Gulf countries if Washington tries to strangle Tehran's oil exports.
Russia is firing back at President Trump's new threat to pull out of a landmark nuclear weapons treaty. One Russian official warns breaking the pact would be a very dangerous step. Here's Roxana Saberi.
As worries about a new arms race between the U.S. and Russia intensify, the 3-decade-old treaty requiring the two countries to eliminate missiles like these could be coming to an end.
Russia has not, unfortunately, honored the agreement, so we're going to terminate the agreement. We're going to pull out.
After a rally in Nevada Saturday, President Trump said he wants to withdraw from the agreement unless Russia and China, which isn't a party to the pact, comply.
If Russia's doing it and if China's doing it and we're adhering to the agreement, that's unacceptable.
The treaty was signed in 1987 by President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. It bans the U.S. and Soviet Union from possessing, producing, and test flying ground-launched missiles with a range of around 300 to 3,400 miles. President Trump can pull the U.S. out of the pact unilaterally, but some lawmakers, including Republican Senator Rand Paul, say it's a bad idea.
The Matrice 200 series, DJI's most rugged, reliable, and versatile commercial aircraft to date.
It's state-of-the-art technology that can go where police, firefighters, and paramedics can't. To that end, each is tricked out with 3 high-def tilt and zoom cameras, as well as thermal imaging, and that makes some people nervous.
They could be flying the drone outside here, right, while we're talking, and they're looking in the window.
Vic Walsack, the director of the American Civil Liberties Union in Pittsburgh, has concerns about their surveillance capabilities, especially by law enforcement.
This is a significant expansion on the police department's ability to invade people's privacy.
Saying that you don't care about privacy because you've got nothing to hide is no different than saying you don't care about freedom of speech because you've got nothing to say. That's a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of rights and what privacy really is, what it's for. Privacy isn't about having something to hide. Privacy is about having something to protect. And that's a free and open society. That thing is liberty.
You know, a lot of people are worried about government agencies spying on them, but they don't seem to be worried about Google or AT&T, who are handling their data minute by minute, and in fact can do pretty much whatever they want with it.
Labeled one of New York City's weirdest and most iconic skyscrapers, 33 Thomas Street has been a source of mystery for many years. Constructed and owned by AT&T, this faceless concrete tower has been linked to the NSA.
Many are calling this skyscraper the most terrifying building in the world. Tom Hanks sure thinks so. He was taking a stroll in Lower Manhattan when he spotted the building and tweeted, "This is the scariest building I've ever seen. What goes on inside?" His tweet sent social media into a frenzy of speculation. It's the Men in Black headquarters.
I've definitely heard that there's maybe some secret government stuff in there.
What is it that people find menacing? Notice, no windows. Not one window on any of its 29 floors. Those aren't windows, they're giant air vents. So what gives? Well, we can now solve the mystery, or at least part of it. Turns out the building is owned by AT&T, and it doesn't have any windows for a reason. It may be the only skyscraper in New York City built to withstand a nuclear blast. There's reportedly enough food, water, and generator fuel to sustain 1,500 people for 2 weeks. The skyscraper is located at 33 Thomas Street in Lower Manhattan. According to a recent documentary, Project X, the building houses AT&T's telecommunications infrastructure and also serves as a listening post for the NSA, the super secret national security agency.
When approaching facility, ring the buzzer and wait for admittance.
Just look at the building. It's got no windows. It looks like something from a space movie. The building is very sensitive to the sun and temperature, so that's why you have these big vents that you can regulate, like basically a big air conditioner.
The main entrance is right here. When I walked inside and tried to get more answers, security told me the place was off limits to cameras.
For most of us, GPS is just how we get driving directions, but it's much more than that. If our GPS satellites were damaged, it could take down everything from electricity to transportation to our phones.
This is a major national security issue. It is a major economic issue.
Starting route to 50.
The same GPS technology that gives us driving directions through our phones also makes us vulnerable. Congressman John Garamendi says attacks or interference with GPS satellites could take out 911 systems nationwide, make ATM machines and credit cards useless, keep airplanes grounded, and even disrupt the country's electrical grid.
It can happen, and it has happened.
He says last year a GPS spoofing attack made it appear as though 20 ships in the Black Sea were instead at the Sochi airport. Another potential danger? GPS jamming devices.
You jam it around an airport, around a port. Ships won't be able to dock, planes won't be able to land.
Dr. William Cressy, a fraud expert with Governor State University, points to a 2013 incident. A worker evading his boss's GPS tracker on a company truck used the jamming device while at Newark Airport. The device crippled the airport. Planes could not take off or land. Cressy says GPS jammers can actually be purchased online.
I think it would be a wise move to somehow regulate the sale and use of GPS jammers. They are being abused for this reason.
And it's going to sit here and try to acquire satellites and not be able to get them.
GPS jammers, he says, can shut down alarm systems on ATM machines and create havoc with financial markets.
We are one of the only countries in this world that does not have a terrestrial-based backup system.
Countries like China and Russia have backup systems in case of attacks or other failures. The U.S. does not.
Some lawmakers are calling this one of the most debilitating threats to Texas, the electromagnetic pulse, or EMP.
Doug, our food, our water supplies, electronics, hospital banking, all of it depends on the electronic grid. Now, in the event of a widespread EMP attack, all of that could be wiped out. Imagine one day if your lights, TV, and phone didn't work.
There'd be no water, no gas, no generators would start.
No electricity, all because of an electromagnetic pulse, an EMP, which is a powerful electric charge in the air that physically damages electronics within a given area. They can be given off by weather or a weapon.
Can you describe what the electrical grid looks like in this country and who runs the electrical grid in this country?
Sure. We have 3,000 different utilities that run the electric grid, which is privately owned. It's not run by the government.
And this you can just put on the wall. The water purification.
Some are already preparing for extreme situations.
That is a major concern.
Dana Ellington says that people come into his Richardson store every day worried about a severe power outage.
Food bars, food tablets, a little miniature stove.
And he's stocking up too. Water, food.
Our biggest sellers are the freeze-dried food.
When it comes to preparing for no electricity, I found out battery-operated items are the #1 seller, followed by solar.
You can be proactive or you can be reactive.
The reason some people want to be proactive now?
Taking out that part of our military would severely cripple our capabilities.
Paul says this isn't doom and gloom, but the state should take precautions. He'd like to see EMP shielding technologies installed on the grid system.
Electromagnetic pulse.
Yes.
Is that what electricity does as it moves? What does that mean exactly?
Well, think of it this way. I think everybody has had the experience of driving down a highway with your radio on, and then you pass under a high power line and you lose the radio. Then you come back out on the other side. That's basically all an EMP is. It's an electromagnetic field, all right? Except it's much more powerful than the field that you experience on the highway. Now imagine there's so much energy in that field that when you go through it, all the electronics in your car are destroyed. Now imagine that field is not just localized to a small spot on the highway, but it covers all of North America, and it would destroy electronics across that entire area. That's what could be accomplished if you had a single nuclear weapon and detonated it above the atmosphere.
The potential of an electromagnetic pulse or EMP attack on this country, this is deeply alarming, because this now makes it pretty clear that North Korea is almost within reach of Japan, and perhaps as well, with some success, the United States itself, or at least some of our territory.
Indeed, their current missiles can already reach Japan and South Korea. We talked last week about they can pose a satellite threat to the United States.
Are we absolutely convinced that they are working toward an EMP attack? How certain are you? We talked last time about 2 satellites held by North Korea that have been put up by North Korea that are going around the globe at the perfect altitude to carry out an EMP attack. How certain are you? What is your level of confidence?
Well, the EMP Commission has high confidence that this is part of the North Korean game plan. In addition to this most recent test, which, by the way, was launched on a trajectory consistent with practicing for EMP.
North Korea may be ramping up its missile program on the heels of last week's summit. Experts are now pointing to clues in these new satellite images.
Experts say the rebuilding of this North Korean launch site is rapid and deliberate at a site that had reportedly been dormant since last summer.
This morning, those new images of construction at this long-range launch site in North Korea, showing cranes, vehicles, and supplies next to the test site. The images emerging less than a week after President Trump and Kim Jong-un's Hanoi summit broke down, which just this weekend Trump called historic.
I had very productive meetings with Chairman Kim Jong-un. Very productive.
Experts believe construction began again at the site either shortly before or just after the Hanoi summit. President Trump has made the lack of testing of nuclear and missile sites a major talking point when citing progress with North Korea.
We have no testing, no missiles going up, no rockets going up, no nuclear testing.
You are entering one of the most secret places on Earth. It's a bunker built into a hollowed-out mountain in Colorado. It's just one of the top secret shelters where 7,000 Americans will go to in the event of nuclear annihilation.
The government built more than 100 of these bunkers and relocation facilities around the country.
There's no room for families.
Wives, children not included. The plans to get a small number of government officials out of Washington, out of major cities, and into these bunkers around the country. And it doesn't include families.
Garrett Graff is the author of the new book, Raven Rock, the U.S. government's secret plan to save itself while the rest of us die. Another bunker is buried in Virginia at a place called Mount Weather.
This is the Mount Weather facility about 60 miles west of Washington, D.C. And it looks like a typical secure government facility. It is surrounded by a chain link fence with a barbed wire at the top.
Armed security patrol the entrance to a doomsday bunker that's reserved for the wealthy elite.
Since the election of Donald Trump, we've seen a whole new demographic of people calling in, people that didn't know we existed before.
Larry Hall is the owner of the Survival Condo Project. These 16,000-pound doors lock you inside. We're heading deep below the surface of the Earth into an underground bunker like no other.
We are in a typical full-floor residential unit, and even though we are more than 100 feet underground right now, you can see that it's certainly not a claustrophobic area.
12 luxurious condos exist here with fireplaces, high-end appliances, jacuzzis, even windows. Yes, windows. High-definition TVs broadcast a live feed of the outside world right into your living room. And look at this. It's a swimming pool with a slide and waterfall. Other common areas include a movie theater, rock climbing wall, and shooting range. There's even a farm that grows all the fresh fruits and vegetables you'll need.
This can grow up to 70 different species of plants, lettuces, tomatoes, carrots.
The bunker runs on power sources like wind and diesel generators.
We have enough fuel to run these diesels for 2.5 years.
From secret Russian signals to the bizarre hum of ancient statues to sonic booms and intriguing interference, our world is plagued by unexplained noises. Scientists continue to be perplexed about these seemingly paranormal sounds, and there are no clues as yet as to who or what might be making them. Here are 5 fascinating examples of extremely weird sounds. Number 1. The buzzer, a secret Russian signal. Broadcasting at 4625 MHz, a strange repeating radio signal called UVB-76, and also known as the buzzer, has been transmitting beeps, buzzes, and occasional human voices 24 hours a day for the past 35 years. Initially, the broadcasts seemed to be coming from somewhere near Moscow, but have since moved to the vicinity of St. Petersburg. There are a number of theories to explain what the buzzer might be for, from contacting submarines, communing with aliens, communicating secret messages to members of the Russian military, or that it acts as a dead hand. If the latter explanation were true, it would mean that in the event that Russia is hit by a nuclear attack, the drone signal would stop and automatically trigger a retaliation. The signal is thought to emanate from the Russian military, and there have been suggestions of a connection with the series of arrests of alleged Russian agents across the United States in 2010. According to the FBI, this long-term deep-cover network of Russian spies who were said to have received their instructions via coded messages on shortwave radio, specifically 7887 kHz. However, no one has ever claimed responsibility for the UVP-76 radio signal, and experts are still baffled as to what it might represent. There's absolutely no information in the signal, says David Stupples, an expert in signals intelligence from City University, London. 2. The Colossi of Memnon. The Colossi of Memnon are 2 monumental statues representing the pharaoh Amenhotep III from 1386 to 1353 BC of the 18th dynasty of Egypt. They're located to the west of the modern Egyptian city of Luxor and face east towards the River Nile. The huge figures are 60 feet, 18 meters high, and weigh 720 tons each, and both are made from single blocks of sandstone. According to the Greek historian and geographer Strabo in 27 BC, a powerful earthquake caused the top half of the northern statue to collapse, which resulted in a very strange phenomenon. After visiting the statues himself, Strabo wrote, "Here, the 2 colossi, which are near one another and are each made of a single stone, one of them is preserved, but the upper parts of another, from the seat up, fell when an earthquake took place, so it is said. It is believed that once each day a noise, as of a slight blow, emanates from the parts of the latter that remains on the throne and its base. And I too, when I was present at the place with Aelius Gallus and his crowd of associates, both friends and soldiers, heard the noise at about the 1st hour." What Strabo is describing is that one of the statues began to sing inexplicably after the earthquake damage. The singing was in fact an eerie light moaning or whistling sound which was heard each morning as the sun rose. A number of other ancient writers noted the singing statue, and there is still graffiti at the base which records whether a particular visitor heard or did not hear the sound. Greek and Roman travellers associated the colossi with Memnon, a legendary Ethiopian king and warrior who fought in the Trojan War and was the son of Tithonus and Eos. According to the early travellers, the singing of the Colossus was said to be Eos mourning for her dead son. The news of the magical statue soon spread, and people from all classes of society and regions travelled long distances to the site to ask questions and hope for the oracle's answers. The statues became a popular tourist attraction and continued to be until the Roman Emperor Septimus Severus visited in either 196 or 199 AD and heard nothing. In a desperate attempt to help the oracle along, he had the northern statue repaired, after which the sound stopped completely. The mundane natural explanation for this phenomenon is that the strange sounds emanating from the statue were probably caused by the increasing heat of the morning, causing the dew inside the porous rock to evaporate, thus making the statue sing. But some would prefer to believe that Eos is still mourning for her dead son in the sands of Egypt. Number 3. The WOW signal. The WOW signal, a strong, narrowband radio signal, was detected by astronomer Jerry Eman on August 15, 1977 at the Big Ear Radio Observatory in Ohio during a search for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence. At the time, the telescope was pointing towards a group of stars called Chi Sagittarii. Eman was so taken aback with the signal that he circled it on the print readout and wrote WOW. Analysis of the signal showed that it displayed all the characteristics of coming from interstellar space, and it soon became something of a controversial subject, especially for those involved in SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. But the problem is that despite many attempts, the signal has never been observed again, and so remains unexplained, despite claims that it was caused by an alien transmission or perhaps by a star. However, recent work by Professor Antonio Paris of St. Petersburg College in Florida may have solved the mystery. Comets. Paris found that two comets, known as 266P Christiansen and 335P Gibbs, were both passing through the part of the sky that the Big Ear Radio Observatory was surveying in 1977, where the WOW signal had come from. Paris and his team believed that the hydrogen cloud accompanying one of the comets could have caused the signal. Significantly, the WOW signal itself was detected at 1420 MHz, which is the radio frequency that hydrogen naturally emits. This theory would also explain why the signal was not detected again, as the comet that caused it had moved into its orbit. However, the comet hypothesis has been met with strong criticism, particularly from members of the original Big Ear research team. More detailed analysis of the theory shows the comets in question were not in the surveyed area at the correct time. Furthermore, comets do not emit significant amounts of radio waves at these frequencies. So, for the moment at least, it seems the WOW signal must remain unexplained. Number 4. Upsweep. Upsweep is an unidentified sound first detected in 1991 by the Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory using SOSUS, an underwater sound surveillance system with listening stations around the world. The sound, which resembles a car alarm and seems to oscillate between frequencies, is at a high enough level to be recorded throughout the Pacific Ocean in spring and autumn. According to the laboratory, the sound consists of a long train of narrow-based upsweeping sounds of several seconds duration each. The source location of the sound has been extremely difficult to identify, but it is certainly in the Pacific, around the halfway between Australia and South America. Upsweep appears to be seasonal, reaching its peak loudest in spring and autumn, though it isn't clear whether this is due to changes in the source or seasonal changes in the environment. The source can be roughly located at 54 degrees south, 140 degrees west, near the location of probable volcanic activity. thus leaving to the theory that it is somehow caused by volcanic activity. It has been noted that the overall source level has been declining since 1991, though its origin still remains unexplained. Number 5. The ping. In 2016, a mysterious pinging noise was heard coming from the seafloor in one of Canada's northernmost territories. The sound was heard in the Fury and Hecla Strait, a channel of water in the Nunavut region of Canada. The Canadian Department of National Defence was informed of the strange noises and launched an investigation into their origins, but to no avail. Local hunters in the remote Arctic region claim that the pinging sound was driving wildlife away. Legislative Assembly member George Quillout told CBC News that the mysterious sound's potential effect on wildlife was concerning. That passage is a migratory route for bowhead whales, and also bearded seals and ringed seals. There would be so many in that particular area, Quillout said, recalling his own days of hunting there. This summer, there were none. According to local authorities, no territorial permits were issued for work, such as construction, blasting or hydrography, in the area that could explain the noise. The military also ruled out the presence of both domestic and foreign submarines in the area. The Department of National Defence promised to take the appropriate steps to investigate the noise, but remained equally baffled. The cause of the pings remains mired in mystery, a spokesman said.
We thank you for watching this video and ask you to spread the news. Put this video on your social network or link to it so that you can be part of the anonymous movement. Together we are strong. Together we are anonymous.